Alrighty, time for main bearings. So the main bearings support the crankshaft. This is an example of a new main bearing right there. You'll notice it looks like this one. This happens to be the number 3 main bearing. It's special because this lip right here, that's actually the thrust bearing. So the other bearings look slightly different. As you can see, they're more just half shells. The thrust bearing has the sides for the crankshaft thrust, axial movement, we may also say. So those 3 holes, you'll notice, those are going to the oil galleries. This one is solid, so that's how we know it ends up on the cap side. You cannot switch those up. It's very important. Additionally, we need to make sure that that oil clearance hole, that oil feed hole is clear. And I previously cleaned this whole block in the sonic cleaner, and I've blown air through all these to make sure there's no debris. Okay. Now when we go to install these, there's a couple things. Notice this is where the crankshaft rides. This is not. This backside right here is going to sit either in the block or it's going to sit in the bearing cap. So let me set this down. And these you have to be very gentle with. This bearing cap, you can see the thrust bearing is in there. It's very important that the top side of the bearing, where it goes into the cap, doesn't get oil in there, or coolant, or anything for that matter. So when we work with these, by all means, have oil here on this surface. And you can see that one's got some scoring from age. I'm going to set this back where it was. But no oil in here, no coolant, nothing like that. So I'm just going to set this one aside. And I'm going to get all of the remaining main bearings opened up. You'll notice some have holes. Hole, 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 hole. So let me get the bottom shells in. Then I'm going to put some assembly lube on. So here's our first bearing. I won't even set it down. I will bring it straight over. I want to point out, no tang, tang. This tang goes where the tang groove is. And remember, no oil on the back side of the bearing when you do this work. And then we're just going to push it down. And my hands are cleaner than they look. Right? So I'm going to call that one seated. And I'll do the same for the remaining. Alright, so with all the lower halves in, there's something I'd like to explain. These are standard bearings, replacements for a standard crankshaft. Now, I already measured all this stuff. So none of this has ever been machined, and for that reason, there's really no realistic possibility of this having incorrect oil clearance. However, if there's any doubt at all, the thing to do is to lay plastic gauge in each of those, set the crankshaft in, put the caps on, torque everything to spec, pull the caps off, and then measure to verify the oil clearance. Because I've already measured everything and I've got known good, I'm ready to go ahead and assemble. Now at this point, and I've already inspected this crankshaft, if there is anything that I'm worried about, like if I find scoring, this would be the time to polish it, or potentially, use some emery cloth and slowly do a fine polish out. But I've inspected, extensively cleaned. Each of these mains, for example, has the main oil feed line, and that oil feed line drills over to this connecting rod journal and lubes those bearings. I've already cleaned out all those holes, blown through it with the blowgun, made sure there's no debris. That's critical with bearing failure. But I'd like to point out, here are my old bearings. I'm really doing this as more of a refresh. So I didn't have a spun bearing or, some damage on a rod bearing. So a lot of my stuff is going to be more simplified because I'm doing this as a maintenance, basically, a big maintenance, but a maintenance. So I'm now going to swing this crankshaft in, carefully lay it down, spin it, And then I'm going to start prepping these main caps, popping out the old bearings, putting the new bearings, and again, no oil between the cap and the bearing. Alright, so with this in, I'm going to do some additional assembly lube. It's actually not a bad idea to put some on the rod journals as well, which again are known good. So you would not do this until after plastic aging to verify your oil clearance is good. Don't be shy about this assembly lube. Remember, from the time that you put this on, all the way until the first probably 30 seconds of cranking, this will get no oil. Right? When you put the oil in the crankcase, it's not going to really reach this point. So this assembly lube is going to be important. I'll probably do one more round of assembly lube when I do the rods. But for now, that's pretty good. And what I like to do, give it a little spin. And I'm just verifying everything feels really good. And it does feel quite smooth. And then I'm gonna proceed with these caps. And then I intend to do the torque as a separate video, because the torque needs to go in a sequence, and I actually have to look up the specs for that. But we're looking pretty good here. All those are very nicely coated, so I'm ready to do the bearings and the caps. Oh, and yes, it is critical that these go back on the way they came off. So I labeled them, but they're also labeled here. If you look, there's the 5th, 4th, 3, 2, and 1. So let me get these swapped over. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead, pull that bearing off. Now note it's got the tang right here. Bring in the new one. Again, clean hands. Set the tang where it came off. I'm going to be very, very careful to make sure I've got the tang in its place there. Right? And then this was the 5th. So I'm going to put the 5th. Actually, I forgot. I better flip this one. It's my fault. Next one is where they have to have it here. Pull the bearing. Tang is on the left from my perspective. It actually was a little bit oilier than I thought, so I'm going to clean my hands a bit. Lay this bearing where it goes. Okay, get it in there. Verify it's in the groove there. Looking really good. Now some vehicles you actually have to center these, but this one has the tang for alignment, so we're good. Right. Now I'm going to show you something. This is a little trick that I did. Just because, I'm in a school, and though this is my personal project, there's students running around doing all sorts of stuff. So I've organized all this and taped it off. But just in case, I made a mark. I etched this in, forward, and I've done the same for those. So now I don't have to be paranoid about flipping them, but additionally, if this one was backwards, it would protrude out the back, so this cover wouldn't line up for the rear main, And these ones, as you can see, a lot of times will leave marks. So it's not exactly, you could flip them around, but it shouldn't be really tough. Now, the general rule of thumb here, I'm going to snug these down, and I'm going to make sure that this still turns. And then I'm going to torque them in sequence, and I'm going to make sure it still turns. If I torque this one and it locks up, I know it was this one. So you do want to kind of do it and periodically continue to turn the crankshaft to make sure that everything is moving freely. Okay, so let me button this up. All right, so with all these started, I'm just going to lightly snug all these main bolts, but I do need to point out these are a saddle design, mainly because, you know, aluminum blocks is what we do. Do not forget about these side bolts. We're going to get all the bolts in, but I'm not going to tighten anything. I'm just going to get stuff started for now, because remember, this is going to go in a sequence. It's very critical that we have a sequence. And I actually meant to mention this. These are torque to yield, so the safe bet is actually to replace every single bolt. And these are also supposed to be one-time use because they come with a Loctite type adhesive. And so I'm actually going to do a little more research right now, because I don't remember exactly what goes on these, and I need to find out. All right, so again, smooth. All the bolts are started. Let me run them down. All right, all run down. As you can see, next step, get out the digital torque wrench, look up the specs for the sequence and the multiple steps of torque. All right, so here's the sequence. You can see center, one, straight down. Now those are the bolts. So I do want to point out those bolts are going to go in sequence. We're going to do, not the M8s, those are size M10. Those are going to be 15 foot-pounds all the way through, right? Then when we get to these outer ones, starting with 11, right? 11, 12, 13, 14. Those are the studs. Those also are 15 foot-pounds for now. So I can set up this torque wrench. Go down just a bit. The bolts are 13s, so I'll load it up with a 13. All right. And P.S. for the record, these, I re-looked it up. These are not torque to yield bolts, so we should be good to go. Okay, 1, 2. Then I'm just gonna recall, I believe I go to the right. Right there, 1, 2, 3, 4 to the right, 5, 6, 7, 8. And just, you know, not a real big deal. You can do it pretty quick. Let me button it up. All right, so I just got to 8. The next step, I need to change over to 11. That's actually 15. So let me do that. All right, so those studs are done. Let me run back to this spot. Those 1 through 10 are the bolts, I want to remind you, and then 10 through 20 are the studs. So 1 through 10, check it out, 80 degrees right here. What's interesting, it kind of left out the studs. The studs actually have a different spec, and it was buried up here in all data. The studs actually call for crankshaft main. Where are we at here? M8, those are the small ones. M10 bolts, 80 degrees. M10 studs right here at my thumb, 51 degrees. So not the same. So for the 80, I got to switch that over to 13. All right, so this is the special function of a tech angle torque wrench. They make other torque wrenches like it. Let me clean that little oil off the lens. So when I turn it on, it automatically goes to foot-pounds, but we've already done that. What I actually need to do, well, just before you're here, I held this enter button, and that'll bring us into foot-pounds. So if you hold the, just trust me, if you're on foot-pounds and you hold the enter button, it'll go to torque angle. Now we didn't need 180, we only need 80. Boom, there you go. Alrighty. There we go, that's how you change back and forth. So there's our 80, starting with number 1. Okay, ready? Okay, so as you can see, this torque wrench is really nice for this. We don't have to make any marks or anything. Alright, so I'm going to go through and do all the bolts. 1 through 10 done. Now recall, we're going to do that same sequence, but it's going to be on the studs, which means I'm changing over to 15, and I'm going to drop this to 51. Alrighty, so here we are in the 51, the studs. You'll notice same type of a thing. Do it in the exact same sequence, not a real big deal. So let me button those up. Okay, there's all the bolts, just for reference, still turning nice. The only thing left were those side saddle bolts, and those I believe are much lower at about 18 foot-pounds or so, which we saw down here. It talked about the M8. Those are the side bolts, 18 foot-pounds. So I'm just going to button up those 18 foot-pounds, and the crankshaft will be torqued. And the next technical thing is getting the pistons in, and that's definitely a different video. Alright, so on a different page, it does specify those M8 bolts come with a sealant, so they're supposed to be replaced. I'm actually going to go ahead and put a little sealant on them, and I'm going to reuse them. But I'm not saying you should. I'm saying that I'm going to. So, let me do that. So here's one of those side bolts, and because I'm supposed to use new ones, but I'm not, this is my approach. This is perfectly good RTV, but the tube clogged, so let me just get a little on. There we go. Okay, that's more than enough. All right, and then because these go down here and they're going through the block, that's why they come with some sealant. So I'm just gonna sneak it in there, and then I'll just buzz it, snug it, and then I'll come back through and do that 18 foot-pounds on all of these, all 10 of them. All right, so I'm on that side bolt here. Just shooting for that 18, right? Okay, so 10 of those, and all the mains are going to be done, and I'll move on to the pistons and connecting rods with new bearings next time. There you go. All right, so this is cylinder number 3, which is going to be right here. So first thing I'm going to do is rotate the crank so that this journal is kind of away from that cylinder, right about there. That way when I slide this in, it's very far from the journal. So there are special tools to help guide it on there, but this is the way that I personally recommend it. And you guessed it, I'm also gonna hit this with some more assembly lube, and it's I already have done that, but it's gonna get a little extra. So now I can rotate the entire engine stand, the block on the stand, right? So I can get number 3 up. Okay. So 3 looks good. I'm actually gonna turn the crank just a little more, so you can see it's like pretty much in the middle. I'm gonna lock the stand. Actually, you know what? Shoot, that's 4. I need to go up a little more. I just confused myself. So here's 4. Alright. Rotate the crank down a little so I can see it. It's nice and centered. So I'm gonna bring that piston over. And as you'll remember, that 4 number, remember that 4? That's going to be forward. So I'm just going to set this out of the way. And this has an arrow, so I know which way forward is. And also, I marked the rod, so I know which way 3 is several different ways. Now I'm just going to bring this down. I'm going to keep the rod from banging into the cylinder. Whoops, there's one more step. This is my oily towel. I have oil all over this. I'm going to just get a little more oil on there off screen real quick. Okay, like this. That right there. And then I'm going to wipe down this cylinder with oil. Okay. Looking good now. Alright, then, like I was saying, I'm going to hang this cylinder in here with the forward arrow facing forward. I'm just going to let it sit right there for just a quick second while I grab the piston ring compressor, which I have nicely lubricated. Actually, it's probably about due for a little bit more. Right there. Okay. Now, and this has a bottom. So this is the bottom, and this is not the best tool. So I'm making do with it's all right. It's not damaging anything, but it's really not the best. Now I'm gonna start to squeeze those, and I'm gonna bring the other tool I like. This has a rubber foot on it, so it's really nice to tap down. Really, the tool they call for is a ball peen hammer with I guess any type of hammer with a wooden handle would be great. But basically what I'm gonna do is squeeze this piston, bring it up a hair, and just get my finger under it so I can get the ring compressor down a little lower. Make sure I got all the rings nice and compressed. Okay, got them all. And I'm squeezing it because this tool's a little bit worn out, so I can't actually let go. Then I can just lightly bump it down. Keep it nice and flat. Compress these rings. I actually need to pick it up just a hair, so I missed that bottom one. Make sure I got that bottom one too. Right about there. And here we go. this tool's probably got a little more wear than I would like to use, but as you can see, it still works. It just takes a little finesse. And so now I can roll it over. The piston shouldn't fall out because it's going to be fairly tight. Alrighty. A little more. Now I've already pre-oiled up that journal. So just gonna slide it in a little bit, get it seated nicely. Alright, we're just about there. And I may just rotate the crankshaft into the rod a little. Okay, right there. Alright, so that rolled in nice. Pretty nicely. Now I gotta get the cap on there. So as you'll recall, it comes back into play. We need that 400 number. That 400 number goes forward. Or I could have made another mark, but being that they had the casting number on there, that was all good. So now the next step is kind of interesting. Get the torque wrench on, let it sit there so it's zeroing. Spin these down. And these are torque to yield. So that means foot-pounds, which in this case is 15, plus degrees, which in this case is 85. So I have it on degrees from the last one. Turn it over to 15. Okay. Relax, we'll go to foot-pounds. Here we go. 15. 15, change it over to 85 degrees, and this can take just a moment. So one thing that is highly recommended is to put one rod and piston in, turn it, see how it feels, put the next one in, turn it, see how it feels, put the next one in, because if we say, let's say right now I did the fourth, if all of a sudden on the fourth it's hard to turn, I know the problem is rod or piston number 4. So that way we're just doing one at a time. In the case, something goes wrong, we can pop it right back apart, not assemble the whole thing and then disassemble the whole thing. So it just takes a minute for it to see the degrees. Now here we are. Hit our 85. Okay. That one's in. Now I could use a tool to turn the crankshaft, but I found I could just grab the crankshaft weights and just move it. Everything's moving great, especially to be able to do that by hand. So repeat 8 times. Alrighty, next steps. I just put this windage tray on. It's important to leave off this nut, because those are going to still need this pickup tube on. I put the new O-ring on there. I lubed it up with some assembly lube. There's my hardware. But to really proceed, at least that's kind of buttoned up. I need to flip it over, and I need to get the camshaft in, the oil pump on, and I can get the timing set up. So right now I'm about to flip it, and I'm going to, for the first time, open up this BTR cam. And then what's interesting on these, they have a plate right here. And this plate was decent, but this plate has kind of like a built-in seal. And I wasn't too sure on that seal with the little hit and miss. So I ordered a new one, and I have a new plate. So that might be a thing you want. And then I talked with a friend who does a lot of this work, And one thing he pointed out was the oil pumps on this don't have any O-rings. And in this case, I'm good with running stock, and I'm replacing this oil pump. But I guess these oil pumps tend to seep at the block where they seal to the block. So that's an interesting observation. They do have oil pumps that have an O-ring machined to go between the pump and the port. So that's kind of an interesting idea. But in my case, I'm good with just running OEM. So this is the next stuff on my list. All right, so as stated, just about time to get the cam in. So there's the new cam. That's the Brian Tooley Racing Stage 2 truck cam. So I looked at that. That one looks like it's got the specs I want. So I'm going to do that. That's going to go right in this bore. And you remember I lubed those cam bearings really well. But as an additional kind of like level of protection, we'll say, I'm going to get the assembly lube and I'm going to very extensively lube this whole cam. It was new in the package, but I just cleaned it anyway. So you can see it looks perfectly clean. But that is a part that's gonna basically, be rotating on these bearings at least long enough, for the oil pressure to build, and then the oil pressure will come out of this hole. So this is another part, kind of like the main bearings and the rod bearings. They need to be very well pre-lubed. Then I get the lifters in. I did run into a snag. Here's this. This is my original camshaft, which showed some very interesting wear, by the way. Like, I haven't seen wear like that. It's kind of weird. But this is a single bolt hole, and that's factory. And the upgraded cam is a 3-bolt. So what I just figured out, it said that cam was a direct bolt-on, but it's not entirely true. This sprocket is a single bolt. I just had to order a sprocket that's going to change it to a 3-bolt and make sure it has these same markings for the camshaft sensor to pick up on. So the chain is good. The sprocket is good but won't fit. So I'm at a little bit of a snag with that. There's the old sprocket. You can see it was a single bolt. But I can still get the cam in. Now, normally, you don't have to go this deep to do a cam. But the thing is, on LSs that are weird, the lifters sit down in the bore. And the second you pull the cam out, the lifters are going to want to fall down inside. So kind of the by-the-book way to do it would be to pull the heads, pull the lifters and the little trays and all that type of stuff off, then pull the cam. What some people will do, if you want to do this in the car, you could actually leave the heads on. You could loosen up the rocker arms and pull the push rods back, and then you can roll the cam over so it pushes the lifters up into their bore, and then you could slide a rod through on this. And if you slide that rod through, then it'll make sure the lifters can't fall, and you could actually pull the cam out with no risk of the lifter falling in. So that's a cool little visual of how you can do the cam in the car, or truck in this case. But because I'm doing all this work, no biggie. And the other little thing is, this plate had a seal, and the seal looks pretty flat, so you don't even really see it pop out any. So I also, I'm going to put a new plate on, and I have that, but I forgot to bring it. So let me get this cam pre-lubed. And so same type of pre-lube. I'll even put it on the lobes because the lifters are going to slide across the lobes. And while the lifters should be very well lubed because they've been soaking in oil for a week, in my case. They don't need to soak for a week, but that's how long they soaked for me. I'm still going to lube those surface. My lifters have been sitting there with any air bubbles bleeding out, like I said. So that's kind of been getting ready. Now I'm not going to do this with the phone in my hand if I can prop it cool. Let me see. All right, so this should be fairly easy because there's no lifters in place. So just got to kind of, you see it's very well lubed. Let me guide it in carefully. So once that bearing comes off the first, once that journal comes off the first bearing, you got to kind of lift it into the next journal. And just basically locking it in. sweetie. A little slippery for me. And I just lubed it with the that same assembly lube. They do make some camshaft lube, but it's very similar. Now that rear one's just probably a little dry by now, so I'm just gonna shoot a little extra through that hole in the valley. And I can kind of support it from the rear. Keep it moving here. Okay. So now it's in. Right there. Okay. Alright. Now it's in, and I'm kind of nasty. So let me clean up. I realized I might as well stay a mess for a second and start popping the lifters in. So I pull the lifter, look at the roller, right, you can get that to focus. So I need to make sure that roller is in line with the cam. So it's going to go in just like that. That means these flat sides are going to be, the flat side right there is going to be 12 and 6 o'clock. I'm going to go down. You know what I should do too? Just put a little oil in the lifter board and then slip one in. Okay, like that. And I should just put a little oil in each of those boards because they're super clean, but they're also super dry. Alright, now I just go ahead and get those lifters in. Same orientation with the flat spots on the top and bottom. So that way I know the roller sits right on the cam and it's ready to roll. I don't want it to be sideways and trying to scrape. Normally, I would like to have the kind of like the bottom end done at this point with the oil pan on. So I'm going to drip oil through the block right now, and it's going to drip on the ground. But I'm going to put down a little absorbent mat, and that's because I need that timing sprocket before I can, before I can put the oil pump on. And I need to put the oil pump on before I can really put the pickup tube on very well and put the oil pan on after that. So I'm a little out of order here, but it's totally fine for this. So just a couple more, easy. The purpose of letting them sit in that oil the whole time was any air that's in there should be bled out by now. You can also hold them under the oil and kind of like actuate them, like pump them with a push rod or similar. So just about there. Okay. All those are in. Now, I do need to clean this oil off my hands. As you can see, there's those lifters in there. And make sure if you look down in there, this one's probably the easiest to see. You can see that one right there. You just see it with the roller right on that cam lobe. So that's what we needed. And this I may do a little bit out of order, but I'm actually butting it together. I'm kind of thinking we do the cam, lifters, and some of the valve train. But like I said, I need to get a couple parts first. So at this point, I can do these things over here, like the trays. And the primary purpose of the trays is to hold them straight. So I'll get those ready. So if you look, remember how I was saying the flat parts had to be at 12 and 6? Like, see all those? That one's actually not quite straight. By the time I work this tray in, the tray won't go in if they're not lined up. But by the time I just kind of work the tray around a little bit, they'll be all lined up. So that tray will make sure that they're all aligned. And if I was worried about it, I could roll the roll the cam over. I could even pull the lifters and set them in the tray and slide 4 lifters in at a time. But that I'll definitely need 2 hands for. So I may do it just kind of like how I'm doing right now. I can get all these trays in, get the bolts in, get them torqued. All right, so here's the guide. So just for reference, that's 106 inch-pounds on those bolts. I got them popped in, and interesting, it does call to kind of hang the lifters in these and then swing in. I just really can't do that with one hand. So these bolts, I'm just going to get torqued right now. So next step, as you can see, time to put the head on. Now this is going to be a little bit more interesting. It specifies the gasket. It also specifies this angle meter. So again, this is going to be torque to yield. So the bolts need to be new, so new bolts are going in. It does talk if you need to fix the bolts, fix the bolts. It's very critical that all these bolt holes are clean, and I'd like to explain. When this head goes on and we go to torque the bolt, it's going to be initially to foot-pounds, and then it's going to require a certain amount of angle, and that's going to basically precisely stretch the bolt so that it provides a very exact clamping force, a very even and exact clamping force. If your bolt holes are dirty and messed up, a lot of your torque is going to go to just overcoming the friction of the dirty bolt holes, and that's going to stretch it less or uneven. So this is kind of a particular job. Sometimes they call to put oil in the holes or oil on the bolts, and in this case it doesn't call for any of that. It just calls to be clean, and then spray this cleaner on the bolts and into the hole. So just going to make sure it's really clean and get this ready to go. The dowel pins, the dowels right here I never pulled off, so those can be good. And sometimes it'll say which direction the gasket needs to go. So like for example, it may say front or rear or up or down. So I'll prove a point to you. I learned this the hard way, unfortunately. These two gaskets, you know, you're looking at it and like, yeah, the gaskets maybe are interchangeable. Lay them on top of each other and see, wow, all the holes, you know, pretty much line up. I don't have them lined up perfectly, but looks like they're close, right? Looks like everything is fine. Oh, wait a minute. This top gasket has holes. And look, this bottom gasket has holes. They are specific side to side, and you need to know which one you've got. All right, so in this case, and it took a little bit of a reference, these gaskets are actually the same if you flip them. So if I flip them the right way, boom, they're the same. So this is actually smart, the way that they're reversible. So like this surface I just totally prepped. If I bring this one over and I set it, hanging on the studs, you'll notice all these holes line up. This one's blank. Kind of like, well, then why is there a cutout? The only reason there's a cutout in the gasket is because this side needs it. And if I switch the gasket to the other side, remember that one was there for no reason? Well, not anymore. Now you see why that's there. So on some manufacturers, the gaskets are actually side left or right specific. And in this case, they're not. You just have to make sure you have them lined up the right way. So that makes it a little easier. And this gasket's going to be one-time use. So by the time we put the head on and put the new bolts in, the gasket's done. So you got to make sure you're ready for this before you do it. Oops, little malfunction here. So I read a little further. It specifies no fluid, no coating, no oil, no nothing. And I've got both gaskets ready, so I'm just going to swing these heads on. A cool little note I'll show you is, see this coolant passage right there? And this one doesn't have it. The coolant passage goes to the front. So that's one way for me to know that this is the right side, and I keep the exhaust ports down. And then remember, this has to be very clean, so my surface is perfect. I'm just going to swing it onto the dowels. That. And then I'll get my bolts started and I'll jump on the other side. Alright, so what I recommend is getting the head bolts up here, new, clean, just kind of getting them dropped in and started, just because the head will hang here, but you know, it's possible that it could with the right little bump come off. So just get all the head bolts started. It does specify no lubricant. It just specifies it's got to be very clean. So some of the larger bolts in the middle, some of the smaller bolts on the tops. So just get those babies started up, and then I can start getting ready to run some of them down. So just to get them snugged and for time saving sake, right, just very light. I'm doing just a few foot-pounds.
How goes it?
A little slow.
Can I read this to you while we work?
Alright, so it's time. Got all the bolts just lightly, very lightly snugged. So this is the sequence, right? 1, 2, and then 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. But the sequence is 22 foot-pounds, additional 90, additional 70. Then to go back through the bolts 11 through 15, 22 foot-pounds, as you can see, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So I'm going to get that started right here. So we can go for the 22 foot-pounds. I actually need a little extension. An extension like this doesn't affect the torque. It just helps your reach, right? So as long as we're not effectively lengthening the torque wrench, this is okay. Two, 22, 22, so we're going to go 3, we're going to go 4, 5, we're going to go 6, 23, I just went 1 foot-pound over, and 7, 8, 9, and where's 10? 10's in there. 10. Now I'm going to change over to torque angle, and that's when we're gonna shoot that additional 90. Okay. It's gonna be a bit slow. Let me actually set this down. Alrighty. There's 1. There's 2. I think you get the idea. Okay. Next, we need that additional 72 or 70. Okay, there we go. So we're gonna do the same thing. This is gonna be a lot tougher. Good. Good. Ready. Ready. Should be 8. 6. Oh, 7 is actually one over here. Sorry about that. Seven. And just for reference, they're all in and up around about 95 foot-pounds. All right, and the last one's 22 foot-pounds. It's gonna be number 11, 12, 13, 20. This thing makes a red if you're just 1 foot-pound over. Okay, that head is torqued. I need to pay attention. Do the other head. All right, so with the heads on, I'm looking pretty good shape. You know, I could drop the push rods down those holes and just have them ready. But unfortunately, there's not much I can do until I get that plate on, which I have. But then I really need that different sprocket, so I need the sprocket conversion. So for now, that's it. All right, I'm back in action here. Took a little time to eliminate the single bolt stock sprocket in exchange for the 3 bolt, which is the BTR cam. I needed to get this sprocket, which is, I believe, an LS2. Part number is actually on it. And LS2 style tensioner, or just kind of like a chain snubber. And then this is the OEM style crank sprocket. So with those parts and bolts for the cam, I should be ready to go. So the first thing I'm going to prefer to do is go ahead and get the sprocket, this tensioner on here, or snubber. Let me back that up for you. Let me show you something. In here, there's actually seals. So you see that they're on the bolt here. Those seals need to go in like this, and this goes in this orientation. The flat metal part is going to go back. These bolts will sit a little recessed. So that's how it goes. And torque's back on those, 18 foot-pounds. Should have ready. Okay. Then A lot of times what we'll do is get our new chain, take it out of the bag, hang this on our sprocket, and I may have to actually play around to find a top dead center here, so that may take just a moment, but and this could sometimes be a little bit hard to work in. Make sure you got a clean keyway and everything. Okay, so right now where it's at, my dot is down here around like 530. So I definitely need to rotate this. There's a lot of different ways, but the way I'm going to proceed is using the crankshaft pulley or the bolt for the crankshaft pulley. So this one, I'm definitely going to need to use the bolt. Let me get that. Looks like actually it's right here. So I can thread that in. Grab the socket. Bigger than that, so 24 millimeter. By the way, your engine should turn over pretty nice at this stage of the game. So I'm going to get that right at 12, and I will bring you in and show you that mark. Let's take a good look here. You'll notice that mark right there, right? You can see that little dot. Need that at 12 o'clock. Okay. And then, before I bring my chain over, I'm going to just take this, hang it on here. All right, so that's where I'm at. So this one, I'm gonna double check my service manual reference, but I believe this is the mark here, which means I gotta turn it. So essentially, we're shooting for dot to dot. All right, it looks like I might just have to turn the crank just a hair more, like where the cam's at. Let's bump that crankshaft just a touch, just a smidgy, right about there. Looks pretty good. And actually, let me double check that mark, because I don't have that on my manual, because remember, that's a LS2 sprocket. All right, it did verify. So in the service manual, it actually calls for a dot. But I looked at the picture, and these orientations for the cam sprocket are the same. This is essentially the dot, even though it doesn't match service info. So not a real big deal, right? But when I do this, I'm going to do it slightly different. I'm going to bring the sprocket over with the chain hung on it, right? I'm going to hang the chain, and sometimes they put colored links to help you line it up. In this case, the link is really irrelevant, the black link. And then what I found the best way in this type of situation is actually, I'm going to slide this sprocket back a bit. I could take it all the way off, but I have the bolt in there, so that makes it a little tough. I'm going to get this chain on there. I'm going to make sure they're dot to dot, and I'm going to bring it straight in, kind of like together, right? So pretty much there. Just got to tap that sprocket back just a bit. And then I'm going to come in with these bolts. Loctite would be a good idea, but it doesn't actually call for Loctite. It just calls for 26 foot-pounds. These bolts were ARP bolts with that kit. So these bolts will also not have a torque spec because they're not from this vehicle. So I did go ahead and I looked up the torque spec. Those are calling for 26 foot-pounds. So let me come over. We got like a non-marking soft mallet. Let me just pop that baby in. Just kind of, it's just riding a little bit on the keyway right there. So let me spin these in real quick. I'll just snug them. Make sure it's sitting good. Now that original one, well, you know what? It's a 10, not an 11. A lot of different sizes. So, in that original one, that big center bolt had a crazy torque spec. These are a lot easier. Just the simple 26. It's gotta make sure I get this back a little. Definitely maybe just a little bit of a burr on there. So this is a legitimate spot to hit it. Okay. That's bottomed out. So just 26 foot-pounds on that 10 millimeter. Let it calibrate. Turn it up from the 18. Here's my 26. Good. 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 Okay. So all those are actually a little bit over 28 foot-pounds, but I'm going to be pretty happy with that. So ready for the next step. So I thought about it, and actually I'd like to turn this engine over a little more now that I got the cams in and the timing is all set. So just, just to get it rolling here, do a couple turns. Sounds good, feels good. I'm bringing it around, and I'm just gonna double, triple check those marks. So boom, I'm perfect. So now I feel especially good, and actually it's gonna be a little bit of a pain in the butt to get the bolt out, as I found out last time. I don't want the bolt in yet because I have other things I need to do. So I'll just zing it out with the gun real quick. It's out. All right, now that part's done. And I'll give you a bonus pro tip as well. So this can kind of get stuck on the keyway. Like if you look, let me drop you down here. I'm on a tripod. So if you look, there's that keyway right there. You can see. So we need it driven in right to there. What I found, sometimes you smack it with the hammer. Sorry about the dizziness. But what I just thought about real quick, because I took another look and I wasn't thrilled with how it was sitting, I actually took the old sprocket. I just flipped it, bumped it right up against there, and I used that crankshaft bolt right here, and I just drew it in, and that actually drew it in nice and clean. And that would just be, if you have a minor misfitting of that sprocket, maybe because it's aftermarket or whatever. But I did just drive it in, and that worked really nice. So if you have any trouble there, just don't start smacking like crazy with the hammer. I gave it a hit with that non-marking dead blow, but driving it in with the other sprocket actually worked really well. Okay, that's it. Alrighty, our next step is going to be oil pump. Now, technically, if you follow the service manual, they're going to tell you, take your oil pump, disassemble it, measure it, clean it, inspect it, do all sorts of work. But generally, if you're doing an overhaul, don't even take it apart to see what metal's in there, but don't reuse an oil pump. It doesn't make sense. So that oil pump is set aside. This is my new oil pump right here. The oil pump is going to land right here. Now in this particular design, it's just flat machine surfaces. So I want to make sure those are clean. There's no gasket where it goes into this main oil bore right here. So just grab the bolts. I'll be right here. Now when I put it in here, I have to actually line it up on the crank sprocket. So there are teeth in there that I'm kind of trying to work on. Right, actually I need to center it just a bit. And looks like right about, yeah, I just don't have it in the perfect spot. If I want, I could spin it, but shouldn't beat me up much more. It's beating up me a little more than I expected. So right about there, slide it in, the bolts started. Like I said, they do make some that have an O-ring groove machined, because these pumps are known to leak at a little bit higher RPM, but it's not really a big deal. It's just going to leak right back into the pan, so it doesn't create a real problem. So I'm not going to make a big thing of it. And looks like those are going to be about 9 foot-pounds, so I definitely have to go really light on my power tools here. And I could torque those, but instead, what I'm going to do is go for this oil pump pickup tube. Now, you'll need a new O-ring. Crazy not to do a new O-ring. With O-rings in general, I just, like to have some oil on those so they don't tend to roll over. And I'm just going to swing it up like this. I'm popping it into the pump with just a little bit of effort. Fits nice. And then there's a couple studs up on top that I believe you can see. Yeah, you can see them. So have those handy. Those, I believe, we're going to be something like 18 foot-pounds. So let me check that real quick. Okay. Oil pump. Okay, actually, the oil pump bolts are 18, 9, and 18. Okay, yeah, no problem. So this bolt is actually about 9 foot-pounds right here. Now I might just have to slightly prime that. All right, so this is the one I really needed to go super light on. And then these, not so much. Well, I need a different size. I think those are 13s right there. So, not a real biggie. They're probably pretty close anyway. I'll grab the torque wrench. We'll do our thing. Okay. Drop that down to 18. 18 for these. Uh, 18 for those upper studs. And we're like kind of in the windage tray. Just holding down the oil pump tube. Just needed a very small turn. I was pretty close with the gun. And then, last but not least, this is the one that's much lower. Looking more for like about a 9. I was actually calling it out in inch pounds, but 9 foot-pounds is the rough calculation. Be very close. There you go. All right, so that's oil pump and oil pump pickup installed, as you can see here. So these were those couple studs. And next, Alright, so I videoed everything I did, and then unfortunately my battery died just before I could stop the video, and it corrupted the file. So I lost that one. But basically, once you're ready to get these rocker arms tight, you know, I dropped the push rods in. I started all the rocker arms. Just before I did that, I put assembly lube on all the points where the push rods touch and all the points where the rocker arms touch. Lubed up all the push rods, soaked these in oil for a second, and then set them out. So like, for example, this is cylinder number 1. And if you look, this valve versus this valve, both cylinder number 1, this valve is close to the intake, and this valve is close to the exhaust. So this is number 1 intake, this is number 1 exhaust. Same, like look at this one. Intake, exhaust, way down here. Intake, exhaust. If you really wanted, you could look in the port. You could see it goes to that valve. It turns slightly this way. All right, so when I go to do those, and I do need to make a reminder, when I did the porting in here, as you may recall down in there, I opened up a hole, and that hole goes to the rocker arm. So I actually needed to put some Loctite on there just to make sure that it doesn't create a vacuum leak through the bolt threads. So once those are kind of started, the next step per the instructions is actually get it on top dead center compression. Now you could do that with the pulley off, but I found if I get the pulley started and I rock it on as much as I can by hand, and then I just barely catch the bolt and draw it in, it'll work. Or if you can't catch the bolt, use a longer version of this factory bolt. Draw the pulley in all the way. Then with this 24, I'm going to turn this engine over, and I want to watch those number 1 rocker arms. So let me get a good grip on this here. All right, notice that one just went down. That rocker arm just moved. Remember, that's the intake. So if I'm on intake right now, I'm going to back up to where the intake starts. Okay. All right, right about there is where it started. So I'm going to go a little further back and then change directions. I'm going to go a little further forward. It's a little hard to see. All right, it was very hard to see. Exhaust just came up, intake just started to drop. So I know I'm at the beginning of the intake stroke right here. If I'm at the beginning of the intake stroke and I go right here to 12 and I spin it a 180, you should know that should finish up my intake stroke. What comes next after intake is compression. So if I do another 180, that should get me to top dead center. If I wanted to verify that, I could put something in the spark plug hole and feel the piston. But I know I'm at TDC cylinder number 1. Now I'm set to adjust half of the valves. All right, so with cylinder 1 TDC, we're going to hit exhaust 1, 2, 7, and 8, and intake 1, 3, 4, and 5. So starting with 1, obviously we're just going to do, right, intake of 1 would be this one. So we'll tighten that one. Next we would do intake of 3. So this is 1, 3, intake of 3. 1, 3. We're not going to do 5 and 7 in this round. Actually, we are going to do 7. So 7, right? And then on the evens banks, 2 and 8. So I would go with 2, intake is this one. 8, intake is this one, right? So let's go ahead and do all the intakes. Probably I would do in order. 1, then 2, then 7, then 8. Doing all those 22 foot-pounds. And then we're going to do exhaust. 1, then 3, then 4, then 5. Then we're going to rotate this 360, which I actually already did off camera. So when I rotate it 360, that's going to now have, this is going to be on top dead center exhaust, which isn't really relevant. What's important is these different cylinders will now be on compression. So we're going to do right down here after the 360 degrees. Intake, exhaust, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So actually I did that first one wrong. My fault. It's exhaust first, then intake. Exhaust 1, 2, 7, and 8. Intake 1, 3, 4, and 5. Exhaust is going to be 3. So let's find exhaust number 3. Right? Cylinder 1, cylinder 3. Look in here. This one is exhaust. So boom. Get that one. 1, 3, and then 4. So this is 2, this is 4. The right side is exhaust. So go ahead and get that one. And then, I had already done that. I'm sorry, I lost that video. But what's kind of cool that you can tell if you don't want to necessarily do everything by the book is if you look, let's say that we're going to do after the 360, we're going to do 3. So here's 3 exhaust. What's interesting, you notice 3 exhaust is slightly loose. That's because it's off the cam. So if you have a valve, if you have a rocker that's really tight, like this one's on the intake stroke, and that's why it's so tight, and it's not on exhaust, and that's why there's just a little bit of lash, like a little bit of play. So generally speaking, right, not super by the book, you could go and feel which rockers are a little loose. That one's a no. That one's a no. No. Yes. No. Yes. Yes. And no. The loose ones, you can torque those to the 22 foot-pounds. Both sides. In a way, you can follow this so you make sure you don't miss any. Or if you want to just do the loose ones, do the loose one, then turn it 360 and do the other loose ones. So either way, both of those would work. Once those are done, we're actually ready to get the valve covers on. And I also got that on the other video, but I had a couple little tips. One, when you pull these out, the whole grommet's going to come out. You're just going to rip the grommet right off. Boom, just rip the old one out. Then I want you to take the new grommet with the bolt out, right? Because you're going to pull the whole bolt out and rip the grommet right off the end of the bolt. Then I want you to take the new grommet and set it in and push it all the way in the valve cover, because these valve covers, these little grommets, they have a little lip seal that has to come through the bottom. Like, see how that's through? I found a lot of people try to put the grommet on the bolt, and the grommet doesn't really come through real well. So my tip is have the bolt out, separate the grommet, push the new grommet in, and then push the bolt through. And you're going to have to push really hard. Pow! Then it'll go through. Cool. So those are just about ready to install. I just got to do minimal little cleanup. And then this is the valley plate. And so this is non-displacement on demand, which is why partially why I like this engine. So just getting that one all ready. And also this one, I've got this valve cover gasket completely ready. Although it's let it sit, so look, it fell out of that groove. So I'm actually not completely ready. Looks like it, while it was sitting there, kind of had it work its way out. So some people would reuse these, but they do have a little tendency to leak. This is not super critical that we have no oil on, but it is super critical that it's firmly in that groove. If it's really fighting you, sometimes we'll put a little bit of sealant in a couple spots and just set it, and then let the sealant dry like for an hour, and then it'll sit pretty well. So this one, for example, I got it sitting good. I could actually swing it over with one hand and get it set on. And I've already gone through and done all my torquing, so I know I'm solid, and I can just go ahead and get a couple of these started. And I'm going to get this engine sealed up good, and I'm going to be swinging it in the truck tomorrow. So get these started, get both sides started, and then we'll do the final torque. All right, and then these are pretty low, just 9 foot-pounds. This one feels pretty loose so far. Bring it down. I'm going to actually probably bounce around a little bit, get all these snugged a little better. get to that 9. Ooh, just about. There you go. So they smush the grommet actually a little more than I expected. But spec is the spec. Generally do from the inside out as recommended. Like many gaskets, this is one-time use, and it does seem you could probably reuse it, but now you kind of see why it's mushing these grommets pretty substantially. So you can see why they definitely are going to recommend one-time use. Okay, I'm gonna do the same on the other side. Ready? Valve cover or rocker cover bolts are in and torqued. The next thing is valley plate, so all these little O-rings are pulled. The new gasket's on. I'm gonna reference real quick. I don't think it needs any RTV. No RTV, just the gasket and 18 foot-pounds. And then if there's anything going on with that oil pressure sensor, that's 26 foot-pounds, and it needs a required sealant. That's like a Teflon type sealant, liquid Teflon. So just gonna pop that baby on there. The original seals, when they were sitting in the groove, were flat. These didn't come with my kit. I had to actually order this totally separate. But if you look, now the seals are sitting nice and high, so I know they're gonna seal. It's kind of frustrating because this rebuild kit was supposed to come with that, and come to find out it came with several versions of different valley plate gaskets, none of which were like this, none of which came with the O-ring. So there was a little bit of figuring out to do on that one, but I'm gonna swing this baby in here real quick with, I think I can do this one-handed. Alrighty. Okay, and you'll notice this is one of my dirtier parts. The reason why it's one of my dirtier parts is because I didn't want to really deal with that oil pressure sending unit and have to put new sealant on it. So I left it in. I just hand scrubbed this. I didn't put it in the sonic tank because it would ruin my sensor. So it's a little dirtier than I would like, but it's really not dirty. It's just not quite as clean. Now these bolt holes should be fairly easy to line up, and I had them organized here. So I'll get a couple started, then we'll continue. Now notice these bolts, they kind of slip tight between that O-ring that's built into the seal, so I'm going to be a little careful getting those aligned. And that's why the oil doesn't wick up the bolt threads, because that seals tightly on the bolts. So that's pretty nice. All right, I'll get a few more in, get them going. Alrighty, all in. I'm just going to shoot for that torque spec, 18 foot-pounds. Hit it pretty close. Good. All right, so I'll go through, knock all those out. And so with that done, there's really only a few things I can do. Got that sensor in, torqued, harness run. This is the crankshaft position sensor. It looks dirty, but it's brand new. I can go ahead and do spark plugs right there. I can get my ignition coils bolted up, but I'm going to clean these up a little bit more, run some wires. That stuff's not really engine work though. It's, it's more general work. And then I'm going to get the manifold gaskets on, but I'm probably not going to hang the headers on this, and I'm probably not going to put the intake manifold, and I'm probably not going to put the fuel rail on yet either. What I am going to do is get the new gaskets on there, and I am going to get all new O-rings on the bottom of these injectors because they came in the gasket kit. The reason I'm not going to assemble that yet is I found it easier to work with the engine in this minimally assembled state. So I am going to do the spark plugs. And, I may do the coils, but I'm not going to do the intake and stuff because I need to get this in, set on the engine mounts, and then it's very easy for me to reach up over and assemble the rest of this in the truck rather than have the chain come really tight over the intake. Rather do it like that. And then, of course, I'm going to get this flywheel on flex plate, which I will put Loctite on those bolts. So that is probably going to wrap this engine assembly up. It's taken a while, but it's turned out pretty perfect. So there you go.